Shedding rivers of tears, the little boy held the wrinkled palm of the great master tightly to his cheek. Many people gathered around the large bed on which the old man was lying. Among these many were not only humans, but fairies, demons, and even a reptiloid. And the old man struggled to inform his friends that he would not be able to use anything resembling magic. Everyone looked at him with a sad, and some with a regretful look. And the old man realized that it looked like he would forget everything to have happened in this life. But he would be born again in this same world, but already as Masil Lorraine. Since that moment, it's been like 500 years. The big mansion that sits on the hill is Lorraine's home. In the large library, a small boy was reading intently while standing near a shelf. This boy's name is Masil Lorraine, and he is currently 5 years old. Suddenly, a ringing voice was heard in the room, calling Masil to be his brother. This caused the boy to look away from his book, raising his gaze. A little girl ran up to him with a huge book in her hands. She wanted him to read the book of his choice. This little sister of his, and her name is Larsa Lorraine. She is only 3 years old. Masil, without hesitation, willingly agrees to the offer from his sister, but then notices that this book is an expanded version about wind magic. With undisguised surprise, the boy clarified from his sister that she herself has read the book for beginners, and the happy-go-lucky girl only confirmed his guess. The younger sister's answer surprised the boy even more. Masil praised his laughing sister exuberantly, hugging her tightly. The next minute, however, it occurred to the boy that Larsa could read the book herself, which he informed her of. The girl, with hope in her eyes, shyly confessed that she wanted her brother to read it too. This pleased Masil, so he promised that he would certainly do so. The girl was left satisfied with her brother's answer and the fact that he stroked her head. But the boy was confused about something. He wouldn't be able to use magic, after all, so the book would be read, but he wouldn't learn anything from it. The girl grudgingly objected to her brother, informing him that her parents had already told her everything. Masil only stared at his sister in puzzlement. Larsa, with undisguised admiration, quickly blurted out that her older brother was the reincarnation of the Great Zero Sage. She was sure that in the future he was destined to become a hero on whom the whole world would depend. Masil thought about the Great Zero Sage, who was indeed famous 500 years ago as the greatest magician of this world. The boy remembered that the Great Sage was so nicknamed because he used magic that was not tied to potential. Therefore, the whole world and all the inhabitants of this world valued and respected him. And Masil too was born with the same zero potential as the sage. The parents accepted this fact as reincarnation and do not doubt its truth. And Larsa now believes it too. The protagonist had to come to terms with it. If he is the right man, he will become a great sage. But still, if he does reincarnate, the magic will be zero. This is very disturbing to Masil, who has previously tried to use magic. And he didn't like the result very much. Because he can't use magic in this world like everyone else, a feeling of alienation keeps him going. Maybe Masil should have a grudge against the gods because of this, but he is happy to have such a wonderful and very sweet sister. Just by looking at her, the protagonist realizes that she is the best in the world. The girl stared incomprehensibly at her thoughtful brother, and in his head again passed depressing thoughts about the lack of magic. And the question did not give rest, why this gift from the great sage was passed on only after 500 years. A voice behind him snapped him out of his musings. The man was reporting what Larsa had said earlier. The astonished children raised their heads and saw their father leaning over them. His name is Madani Lorraine. He happily confirmed that he has no doubt how in the near future his son's name will be known to the whole world. The father of the protagonist is the lord of the lands in which they reside. And also Masil knows that his dad is an impulsive and straightforward man. The little boy tried to object to his father, reminding him of his magic, but he wouldn't even listen to him. Interrupting his son, the father lifted the book. He wanted the children to pay attention to it. Then, in the silence that ensued, Madani spoke the last words of the great sage. The last phrase was that he would not be able to use magic. This shocked Masil. The shocked boy remembered that Nais and the others could not use magic. He had indeed left that phrase. And his father kept reading the book out loud about Lorraine's descendant being able to interpret the words correctly. Masil remembers that he really couldn't use magic. And his father kept reading out loud passionately, which made the boy lose his temper. The table broke in two from the blow of his fist under the loud request of Masil to stop it. But his family did not even notice that the table broke because of Masil, counting all on old age. And the boy kept on resenting the fact that he couldn't use magic at all in the way others thought he could. Masil took control of himself and tried to calm down, taking a deep breath. But immediately his father exploded with emotion again. Madani excitedly reported that Masil had achieved in his 5 years what the great sage had achieved in his years. He considered it nothing but a destiny that had been preordained for him. After the ardent speech, the next moment the man was already stroking his son's head with warmth and calmness in his voice. He had already jokingly asked Masil to just believe in himself. Madan smoothly circled the entire library in their mansion with his hand, telling the boy that he had read all 10,000 books in just 2 years. However, the man knows that the boy cannot use magic, but he is still proud of his son's diligence. Masil listened to his father's words with amazement. Trailing off, the man did not forget to pay attention to his daughter. Patting her on the head, he suggested to keep up with his brother and learn a lot from him. The girl happily agreed. After a while, Larsa demanded her brother's attention. She demanded Masil to teach her magic as soon as possible, and the brother did not mind, considering that for this purpose it is necessary to read more diligently. The girl objected, explaining that she didn't really mean the book. Larsa wishes to see her brother's magic. They came to the courtyard of the manor, where there were weapons and dummies for trading. In order not to upset his sister, who was almost ready to cry, Masil came to the courtyard. Although he was more bribed by the fact that Larsa is too nice, so it's hard to refuse her. The first in line to use magic was Larsa. She stood a bit forward. The girl concentrated and recited the words for the magic by heart. At the same time, she concentrated the energy in her hands. When she finished reading, Larsa shouted out an arrow cutter and threw her palm towards the dummy. A thin stream of air stabbed into the mannequin's shoulder near the shoulder area. The brother was impressed. He praised and applauded the laughing girl. But it wasn't long before he stood aside as his sister demanded with a push that he try it too. And just as he began to refuse, as tears began to gather in the corners of his favorite sister's eyes, Masil was speechless and silent. Sadly, the girl asked her brother why he was lying to her. She began to demand the surprised Masil to use her magic with assertiveness. The girl wished to see him burn the doll, and the boy had no choice but to agree. The protagonist would feel bad if he still couldn't do anything with the mannequin. He realized that he couldn't become a magician no matter how many times he did it. His sister, on the other hand, was perplexed as to why his brother was thinking so hard and hadn't done anything until now. Masil thought and realized that he needed to draw strength. He was pulled out of his thoughts by the girl's voice, who had already lost patience and was shouting in his face for him to start. In the eyes of the girl, who was looking intently at her brother, there was a pleading look. Confused, Masil rubbed the back of his head, keeping his eyes on his sister. Finally, after a long silence, the boy called his sister by name. You could feel the tension in his voice. The protagonist cautiously asked his sister if she would keep everything a secret, if she would not tell any outsider, and if she would not tell her parents. To everything he received from the girl only confirmations. There was a tense silence between them, but the girl continued to look resolutely at her brother. He looked away thoughtfully. Still tense, Masil agreed to show his sister a little of what he could do. This response made the girl happy, and she jumped on the spot. Stepping forward a little, the boy froze in front of the wooden doll. The protagonist had long known that he was a legendary sage, but he wanted to keep everything a secret. But how could he resist the request of such a sweet sister? The boy assumed a fighting stance, preparing to expend all his energy. A quick swing of the boy's hand towards the mannequin and it broke exactly in half. The children watched in shock as the top of the wooden doll fell to the ground. While the boy shamefully covered his face with his hand, the girl continued to stare in amazement at the broken mannequin. The next moment, rapturous compliments sprinkled from the girl. Even their father couldn't break the wooden doll. But that didn't make the boy feel any better. He wasn't wearing a face. As he headed towards the mannequin, Larsa followed. She was only more convinced that her brother was the reincarnation of the sage. Masil continued to chuckle nervously, saying he didn't know that. The boy picked up the broken part of the dummy from the ground. The dummy had broken before, and Larsa had seen her brother fix her, so she was sure he would succeed this time too. The girl watched carefully as the brother connected the upper part with the lower part, and stood holding the mannequin for a few moments, after which he let go. The wooden doll was intact and there was no hint that it had been two unjoined parts before. Larsa was shocked by this. The girl began to wonder if this was the magic of repair, to which the protagonist evasively replied that it could be called that. However, the little boy in his thoughts admitted that it was not magic. On the way out, the girl timidly approached her brother. She was obviously thinking hard about something and decided to ask. With hope in her eyes, Larsa asked if she could become like her brother if she studied and practiced a lot, to which Masil confirmed without a doubt, and he firmly believes that his sister will become the best sorceress. His brother's words lifted the little girl's spirits, making her laugh radiantly. Then the girl offered to train together, to which her brother agreed. Their voices resounded throughout the Lorraine estate. 2 years had passed since then. Somewhere on some street in Lorraine's estate, several children were showing off their skills. While one was showing a small fire on his exposed finger, others were admiring him. Another boy bragged about being able to make a small-sized cornerstone fire source on a wooden branch. But suddenly everyone was pulled away by one of the children, pointing toward a girl standing a little farther away. He is convinced that Larsa is even more amazing than the other kids. The girl immediately started reciting a spell not loudly, and towards the end, after loudly shouting the name of the magic beetle, the girl abruptly swung her hand towards the cornerstone fire on the branch. The fire instantly disappeared, surprising its creator. The dumbfounded boy continued to stare at the branch from which light smoke was emanating. He was amazed by such magic and, bowing, asked the girl to marry him. And before him stood none other than Larsa Lorraine, and she was 5 years old. At the same moment another voice intervened, informing him that this was not going to happen. Everyone turned their attention to the source of the voice. It was Masel Lorraine, who was already 7 years old. The boy folded his arms across his chest in displeasure. Masel loudly announced that his sister was only 5 years old, and quietly added that he couldn't believe she would ever be a bride. Larsa stared at her brother incomprehensibly, and the fantasy of the protagonist has already played out, showing him an adult version of his sister in a white dress with a bouquet. Tears began to gather in Masel's eyes. Masel protested loudly that his sister would not be a bride, shouting at the boy. The latter was even more dumbfounded and gave in, asking the protagonist not to shed rivers of tears. The boy who had proposed marriage to Lars moved away from the roaring protagonist. It was all strange to him, and Masel continued to roar loudly, calling his sister by name. The protagonist stopped crying when another boy asked if Masel really couldn't use magic. The appeased Masel had nothing to do but confirm the hunch. The children stared at the boy as he explained to them that he had zero potential in magic and it was obvious that he couldn't use it. But then one of the boys remembered that he had heard of such a thing. Masel was interested in this, and he decided to clarify what the boy had heard about it. And the boy replied that Masel is considered to be reincarnated, so he can't use magic at first. But this does not cancel the fact that at the end he will become a great sage. That's when all the other kids caught on and started confessing with glee that they would support the protagonist. Masel thanked them, but was a little puzzled. His sister just as quietly muttered that her brother was awesome. The kids were distracted from their dialogue by a sluggishly shuffling boy who was walking not far past them. One of the boys caught his attention, calling out to the one named Nagami. Nagami waved tiredly at everyone, but refused to join them today. Masel noticed that Nagami didn't look quite healthy. One of the children suggested that maybe it was because of the destroyed fields. It was a green wolf that had been attacking and damaging the houses. Nagami was helping the boy who was telling the story, and he was surprised to hear about it. The other boy decided to ask Masel how the Lord thought to solve the problem and what he had to say about it. The protagonist thought for a moment before answering. Masel honestly admits that his father is trying to take some measures, but he can't solve the problem itself yet, so he asks for forgiveness. The children realize that the Lord is already doing his best, and it is not necessary for him to apologize for that. The children continued to talk on the subject, but Masel's thoughts were already occupied with the harvest from the fields. Ina's wheat is Lorraine's specialty. The fact that it is becoming scarce will soon affect the profits. It's no longer enough for the residents, so it can't be ignored. The protagonist kept thinking that the green wolves live mostly in the forest. This is their lair. Meanwhile, Larsa noticed that her brother was thinking about something, so she continued to silently watch him. When a cloudless night fell in Lorraine's territory, Masel rushed into the forests. As he ran, images flashed through his mind of his father sitting brokenly over the papers talking about the damage from the deadly spider. How Nagami had talked about the family field. The boy roughly guessed what was going on as he rushed down the road. The main character paused, looking around. He had already run 200 paces, but he still hadn't met anyone in the night forest. After a while, Masel heard a strange sound and, without thinking, rushed in that direction. When he saw the source of the sound, he was stunned. The wolf was being devoured by a large monster, writhing with its jaws. The boy lurked behind the trees, trying not to give himself away. For this huge beast had turned out to be a deadly spider. And now that the boy found this monster, a little confused, not knowing what he should do next, the little boy realized that if he even indirectly informed the guild about the deadly spider, they would know that he was leaving the city without permission. Therefore, he chose a different course of action. Masel calmly stepped out of hiding and headed towards the spider. Confident in his abilities, the boy prepared to defeat the monster alone. The boy finally got the attention of the deadly spider. and the monster immediately rushed to attack a new victim, rapidly reducing the distance. But the protagonist did not even move from his seat, continuing to stand quietly in place. The boy reacted quickly and managed to jump high from the place where the front paws of the spider collapsed. The spider spotted its target in the sky and immediately spat liquid in his direction. It was difficult to dodge in the air in any way, so the liquid hit the boy, completely enveloping his body. Some of it even got into his mouth, which Masil had to spit it out when he was already sitting on the ground. The spider, on the other hand, froze not far from the little hero and watched carefully. The boy noticed that the deadly spider looked very pleased. The protagonist realized that the liquid is a toxin that is quickly absorbed into the body. It causes the limbs to become less mobile. However, Masil is not harmed by this toxin. He relaxedly sprayed the remnants of the liquid off his hands. In his previous life, the protagonist had trained a lot and had developed immunity to all kinds of poison. So now he was relaxedly kneading his shoulder in front of the bewildered monster. The boy took himself seriously, assuming that this was his next test. The spider rushed to attack again, but this time he decided to do it from the back of his victim. The monster was instantly behind Masil, realizing that it was necessary to leave everything as it was. And to do that, all you have to do is get rid of the cause of your worries, he said, turning around. The boy held a small drop on the tip of his finger, preparing his hand for a swing. A sharp sweep of his hand and the drop swiftly headed towards the monster. That would be the end of it. The attacking deadly spider didn't even have time to realize anything as the small drop smashed into its head. In the next instant, the monster collapsed to the ground with its belly up, scattering small pebbles to the side. Turning around at the fallen monster, the guy casually walked towards it. As it happens, in small quantities, antibodies are a cure. But if there are too many of them in the body, the antibodies will become toxic. The protagonist's body has hundreds of millions of times more antibodies, all thanks to his training in his past life. After all, Masil's power is in the laws of nature. The boy walked up close to the deadly spider he had killed, realizing that his antibodies had indeed worked as a toxin. The spider's legs were still twitching, but that would soon stop, for the monster was already dead. It was already starting to get a little lighter on the horizon. A tall and statuesque man was frowning and pensive. This man is a guildmaster and his name is Dryjov. All of the guildmaster's thoughts were occupied with the problems related to the destruction from the monster attack. And adventurers are in short supply as a labor force. The man even wondered if the same problem existed in other areas. The door opened abruptly and an excited girl flew into the office. She tensely and loudly began to report that the deadly spider from the western forest had been killed. But the man was so deep in thought that he only mumbled, repeating the girl's words. But when the words reached his mind, Guildmaster Dryjov cried out in shock. A concerned crowd began to gather near the guild. Meanwhile, the guildmaster and the girl had already come out and stood beside the spider lying belly up. It was indeed that deadly spider. The girl continued to report to the man while he looked at the monster that the spider was discovered by D-rank adventurers. They didn't defeat it, they just found it in the forest. No external injuries were found on the monster, nor was there any manifestation of magic on it. But they realized that the monster had been poisoned. The guildmaster was amazed by this fact, for to kill a deadly spider with poison alone, it was very much like the famous Great One. It was the sage that they were talking about. Meanwhile, Masil was gazing carefree from the balcony of the mansion at the surroundings. Some time later, Madanai and his children were walking through the forest. He informed them that all the dwelling monsters in that forest had been destroyed. After his father's words, Masil relaxed, for it was a good thing that no one realized who was able to defeat the spider. The relaxation lasted for a moment as his sister loudly and confidently stated that her brother had definitely contributed to this, and the father of the family picked up on it, admitting that he thought so too. The boy panicked and began to deny his involvement. After all, he is very bad with not only magic, but also with a bow. His father and sister looked at each other, acknowledging Masil's words. And since there was nothing to be done, the father suggested they continue on their way. It seemed strange to the boy that they did not resist. Still, Masil exhaled deeply, hoping he had managed to convince them. No one must find out that he had actually used his power. After all, this power of the laws of nature was given to him in exchange for zero potential. He recalled attacking the dummy with a vacuum wave at supersonic speed, although from the outside it looked like a flip of his hand. Also recalled attacking a spider he killed with a highly toxic poison. But this poison is a high concentration of antibodies in his body, released in the form of sweat. As they walked through the forest, the boy pondered that if he paraphrased the words, it would constitute a kind of magic. That was also how it had been in his past life. It was what everyone thought of as the amazing magic of a sage, and it was cemented in his image. To the boy, however, it felt more like he was cheating, and that was unpleasant. There was a rustling sound up ahead, and then something jumped out of there. Everyone turned their attention to a small animal that looked like a hare. The father offered his daughter to get it, to which he received her firm consent. The girl firmly told her brother to look at it carefully. Larsa smoothly began to move her palms and the air began to swirl slightly near her. During this time they concentrated reading the spell. Once finished, she shouted the name of the magic and struck it exactly on target. Her kin remained pleased with the girl's skills as she cheered. Unbridled joy enveloped the girl and she rushed to her father for a hug. He stroked her head and complimented his laughing daughter. Larsa hurried to her brother for praise, and the boy, smiling, said it was wonderful. But the girl was not convinced. She was a little confused and shyly asked Masil to praise her. Already out of indignation, Larsa puffed up her cheeks as she continued to glare angrily at him. The boy was confused. It had gotten to him what the girl wanted. Masil stroked his sister's head, calling her amazing. And already the response made the girl's cheeks blush. She finally laughed happily, pleased with both the result and the reaction of the others. The father informed the children that it was the turn of the late great sage Masil to show himself. Such a formal address to the boy caused surprise. The protagonist wondered how he could best use magic so that the use of energy would not be noticeable. And another idea came to mind. A new beast came out of the bushes, and the little boy asked his father to show him how to hunt. Manhwa agreed to show his son how to deal with the wolf that came out of the bushes and roared towards them. The man stepped forward, warning his daughter not to get too close. The protagonist was surprised that the warning didn't affect him, so he wondered what the father would say about him. The father laughed out loud, saying that the future great sage should not be afraid of a wolf. The boy only had to say uncertainly that he was not a great sage now. And in his mind he realized that his father's blind faith was growing stronger day by day. But the man had already prepared to attack the wolf, taking the bow from his shoulder and drawing an arrow. The father, as he drew the bowstring with the arrow, decided to show what he could do to his son, to show him one of his techniques. But no sooner had he released the arrow than a huge carcass swiftly descended in front of him. It attacked the wolf with purpose. The man realized the danger in front of them, so he quickly put away his bow and grabbed the hilt of his sword. He shouted to the surprised children to run away. The man shielded the children from the monster, which was a heavy beetle. The monster had already spotted the new victims, turning in their direction. Tense and dumbfounded by this, the man explained to the children that the monster was too strong, but they shouldn't worry about it. They should get out of the forest as soon as possible. But Masil only calmly inquired if they could stay to watch this battle, thus surprising Manhwa. As the children watched intently, their father threw a nervous chuckle, for he thought this was how a future great sage should behave. But Manhwa also realized that even for a future sage, this monster was too dangerous, so he asked them to follow his recommendations. And the heavy beetle kept coming closer and closer. The frightened girl, keeping her eyes on her father, gingerly touched the protagonist's arm, attracting his attention. Masil felt his sister shiver. He realized that the father was doing this for his daughter's sake, so she wouldn't be scared. The man was already angrily shouting to the faltering children to run. The monster was already very close. When the heavy beetle came close, the man slashed at it with his sword. Then he swung his sword again and again, but to no avail. There were no cuts on the beetle's armor, and the monster swung his horn. The horn with all its might struck the side of the man, who had time to cover himself with his arm. But the blow was so strong that Manhwa flew off and slammed into a tree. The beetle flew into the air at the same instant. The man was stunned to see that the beast had not attacked him, but was heading for his children. He would not have time to rush to their aid, so he superciliously shouted at them to run. But the bug was already over the children. The monster was rapidly descending on Masil and Lars, who continued to stand still. This frightened the girl, which made her cry and hugged her brother tightly. The boy noticed his sister's tears, and it made the protagonist angry, because no one dares bring his sister to tears. Angry Masil shouted this at the monster that was almost to them. The monster was torn to pieces, and the angry boy continued to hold his sister tightly to him. The still angry boy didn't even notice how surprised everyone was. Only the head was left of the monster, which fell not far from the children. The boy still continued to glare angrily at the remains of the bug, and didn't notice how the girl hadn't cried in a long time. Larsa looked at her brother in surprise. The sister called out to Masil, which made him come to his senses abruptly, and he felt embarrassed in front of the girl, who already looked at him as a hero. But no sooner had they spoken than the father hugged the children tightly with relief. The man began to praise, calling his son the future sage Masil. The bewildered boy realized he had done it, but he couldn't help himself. It was worth it just to see his sister's face crying with fear. So he raised his voice, letting out a sound wave, which knocked that bug down. The father was satisfied that he was able to catch the sage magic called killing voice today. The girl only looked at her brother with admiration and repeated the name. And the boy tried to explain to his relatives that it didn't look amazing. However, the man was no longer unstoppable. He had asked his son then, and the deadly spider out Masil killed. This conjecture of the father excited the girl, from which she rushed at her brother with questions. Confused and dumbfounded by his father's guess, Masil looked away. But, with a doomed sigh, the protagonist was forced to admit it, but continuing to emphasize that there was nothing surprising about it. His father and sister began to vehemently reassure Masil that there was nothing wrong with it. The confused and shocked boy listened as his relatives shared the rumors with him. They said that the spider had been defeated by a supreme poisonous magic. The man distracted himself to take the bug's horn as a trophy, wondering in passing to his son if the boy would be busy when he returned home. The boy asked interestedly what for, but the father only laconically remained silent. A short while later, when Madani and the children returned to the mansion, a spontaneous party was organized. Already standing on the mezzanine, the man raised a glass in honor of Masil's awakening as the reincarnation of the great sage. The guests downstairs were cheering. The boy was very much panicked by all of this. The protagonist tried very hard to say something to his father, but he found it hard to say anything. After all, it is difficult to say something when the crowd of guests chanted in the hall. The man happily said that he had arranged a holiday, because today was a significant day. His son has gone out hunting with his legendary magic. But Masil seems greatly exaggerated. They were joined by the mother of the family and Larsa. The girl was indignant that her father would not let a word be said to her brother. The boy rejoiced at them, hoping that they had come to persuade his father to stop. But it turned out that they had come with a proposal to make this day a national holiday in their land. And, of course, such an idea pleased Madani very much. Wasting no time, the owner of the mansion attracted the attention of the guests gathered downstairs. The man loudly announced that from today until the end of time, this day is considered a holiday, and it would be called the first anniversary of the Masil hunt. Such news was positively received by the public, causing the guests to cheer below. The boy himself, of course, did not like it all very much. Masil thinks that his father is overdoing it. At Lorraine's mansion, the girl, quietly humming a tune, was choosing between two outfits. Larsa was distracted from her musings when she saw her father and brother walking past her room. She called out to her brother, drawing his attention to her. Sure enough, Masil stopped to see what was wrong. His sister came out of the room, wondering if he was going to go in his usual clothes. But the boy only asked perplexedly where to. The girl turned to her father, wondering if Masil still didn't know. To which the father promptly interrupted, informing her that they were going to the ball. As they packed their bags, the man told her that it was not only a celebration, but also a great opportunity to supply their wheat to the Principality of Amas. Putting all of his belongings into the carriage, the man shook off his palms. He hoped that things would get better in their domain if things went well there. The boy wondered if they should go to such an important event, but he didn't have time to finish his thought. He was interrupted by his father, confidently stating that it was business as usual for them. The father addressed the children by their first names, causing them to stare at him in bewilderment. Before the man's eyes, his children looked very beautiful. And they are no less important, for Masil is the reincarnation of a great sage, and Larsa is a very talented and beautiful girl. Madani had said that Namrai County would be hosting the Principality of Amas, and this was a good opportunity to address the strongest of the world. Larsa cautiously turned to her brother, catching the latter's attention. She hesitates, hesitant to say anything coherent about the ball. She clearly wants something, but doesn't know how to ask. Masil quickly guessed what question was tormenting his sister and answered that he agreed to dance with her. This straightforward answer surprised the already embarrassed girl. Embarrassed, Larsa admitted that she was eager to show him her new dress at the ball. But the protagonist thought it was strange, because the dress could be shown at home. For a moment the girl's face lost emotion. She whimpered and covered her face with her palms, complaining that it was her brother's only flaw, but she had more than enough of it. Her father mockingly mouthed that the great sage was not too subtle with the girls, while Masil stared at his sister incomprehensibly. The father of the family gathered before leaving for Namrai to introduce some people. The man allowed entry and the door swung open. 4 completely different girls entered the room. This is the best squad for the escort called Broken Cow Horns. They introduce themselves. The first girl's name is Katrina, the second Arrow, the third Freya, and the fourth Ash. The father of the family pointed out that the girls didn't look feminine at all, to which he received a grudging reply from Carton that it was a necessity, otherwise they wouldn't be taken seriously. Katrina gripped the hilt of her sword, taking it out of its sheath, then presented the blade to her mouth threateningly, claiming that this sword would protect them from uninvited guests on the road. She ran the tip of her tongue along the edge of the blade. She cut herself, however, and covered her mouth with her palms, almost crying out in pain. Only Freya was afraid for the girl, calling her sister when the rest of her companions were calm. After all, it was very dangerous, and it wasn't the first time she had hurt her tongue. The girls began to chat amongst themselves, completely oblivious to the others present. Mostly expressed discontent in the direction of Katrina. After all, without her they cannot go. And such a thing had happened once. They had to be off work for 10 days because of her. The man got tired of listening to the girls' interactions, urging them to head out. The female squad was very much surprised. Katrina tearfully threw herself at Madanai's feet, informing him that it wasn't as easy as it looked. The boy felt a little sorry for the girls, watching as Katrina wrapped her arms around the man's leg, refusing to let go. The protagonist decided to intervene, and so asked for it as well, to which the man wondered, since it was the future sage Masil speaking. At the mention of the boy's name, the girls became agitated. The girls surrounded Masil, touching him with their hands, and each was delighted to meet him. Emotions overwhelmed them with the realization that this was the one great sage, and they were willing to protect him even at the cost of their lives. However, such excessive attention to her brother did not please Larsa, so she stepped between them, shielding the boy. The disgruntled girl carefully, so as not to cause harm, used magic against the female squad. The girls were whirled around in a circle on the spot by the wind. When the wind stopped and the girls were on the ground, it was obvious they weren't feeling very well. Only Katrina stood back, not realizing who the great sage was. And then the girls began zealously, interrupting each other, saying that he was the savior of the world, he was the greatest sage, and that he had defeated the deadly spider. All this information threw Carton into the deepest shock. The girls were again distracted and gossiped about their own things, forgetting about the others present, which not a little surprised Masil. Once again the patience of the father of the family came to an end, demanding that they pack up quickly. A while later the carriage moved leisurely along the forest road. Gradually it got dark and the people made a break. The man cooked a late supper in a cauldron, to which everyone eagerly gathered. Each scooped himself some brew made with the meat of a wild boar, and the women's troop mentioned that they couldn't remember the last time they'd had a proper meal. The food was delicious, and the aroma. All in all, the girls blurted out with pleasure. They still couldn't believe that they had become the guards of the very one who was the reincarnation of the great sage. Freya was rolling tears of happiness, for everything felt like a dream, and Ash was glad to be done with banditry. But then Katrina suddenly wondered aloud that the magic of thieves also came from a sage. Ash confirmed her guess, but she explained that the sage had actually created this magic to help people. Masil was surprised by this. The girl explained how this magic came about. It happened when the village of Echo was suffering from crop failure, so they needed to find a labyrinth using detection magic. A wise man helped them in this. He gave them a little more magic to explore. Thus the magic of thieves was born. While the boy was eating in amazement, he remembered that he had actually stayed in a bandit village in that life, and there was a shortage of supplies there, so he went hunting and quite by accident stumbled upon a labyrinth. Masil was very shocked that this event in his past life had changed so much over the centuries. Freya decided to check with Ash that she was using stun and detection magic, which was confirmed by the girl. But Ash also added that she can use stealth magic a bit. Katrina admired the great sage even more from all this, and Masil was distracted from their dialogue by something heard behind them. A slight rustle of stomping was heard not far away. Larsa noticed that her brother was peering intently into the thicket of the forest. He realized that someone was approaching them. In the next second, everyone was already surprised by what came out of the forest. Except for Masil, he was calm. Everyone jumped to their feet, for a hostile mountain ape appeared before them. The girls grabbed their weapons, although some of them did not believe in their chances of victory. Katrina, on the other hand, tried to cheer everyone up, that until they tried it, they wouldn't know it. However, her companion noticed that their commander's voice became higher at this point. A startled Katrina began to deny it. Katrina gloomily looked at the threat that had emerged from the forest, realizing that it was too close, hence the need to stay away. Masil watched the rampaging great ape with interest, not realizing that is it really that strong to be so feared. Meanwhile, Katrina was already issuing commands to everyone, sending Ash to attack from stealth, and Freya and Arrow to keep attacking, keeping their distance from the monster. Freya used her staff to read out a spell, while Arrow prepared to shoot fire arrows. They shot at the monkey at the same time, but the monster deftly jumped aside, so the entire attack meant for it hit the ground. But at this very moment, while the monster was distracted, Ash tried to attack it from behind. However, the monkey, as if he sensed it and, without turning around, struck back with his fist. Ash reacted in time to dodge the blow. Ash jumped back to the sorceress, recognizing the monster's swiftness. The fact that this monkey wasn't afraid of fire bothered Fry. They recognized that it is too strong, and the monster seemed to have a sly smile. The female squad leader had to issue a retreat command and rushed back. On the run, she informed that they needed to regroup so that they could defend the Lord. The girl was shouted to be careful, because right in front of her appeared a monkey preparing to strike with closed fists. But it was too late to jump aside. Katrina cursed, realizing the doom of the situation. But Masil intervened in the fight and hit the monkey with such force that it flew aside. The monkey had obviously lost consciousness in flight, and the entire female squad was deeply shocked. The monster with a rumble fell flat on the ground at a decent distance from the people. The girls continued to stare perplexed at the calm and satisfied Masil, who did not even look particularly tense. Katrina, stammering, addressed the boy, calling him a great sage, but Masil tried to remind her that he had a name. This caused the flustered girl to apologize loudly, continuing to call him sage. Freya marveled the most, realizing that she had just seen a legendary magic, and it seemed to be called crushing orichalcum into pieces. Though this was the first time the perplexed Masil had heard such a name, his family was also not left out. The boy was praised by his sister and then by his father, but the man dragged out a too long speech calling him a legendary and unique sage, that he was the strongest, and it was happiness not only for him, but also for the descendants. Masil turned around sharply at a new sound coming from the forest. Several more mountain monkeys had come out to join them and all were hostile. The girls of the female guard squad were terrified. Seeing 3 monkeys already, they realized that their end had definitely come. The completely calm man advised the desperate girls not to panic, but just stand and watch. The Lord's serenity put Katrina in a stupor. Meanwhile, Masil had already prepared to use the ultra-fast vibration of his legs and the friction of air and flame before attacking. He said that everyone was already tired of this hunt today, so he would gather the monsters together to destroy them with just one strike. And the blow was so powerful that a large pillar of fire formed on the ground. Katrina finally fell into a deep shock. The rest of the women's group was also very surprised. It was only the satisfied father and sister who watched the boy's display of strength with joy. When the boy stopped in place, and the raised dust from the attack began to slowly dissipate, he turned his attention to the ground around him, in which he saw his surprised reflection, for the surface had turned to glass. Freya proclaimed that it was the legendary magic of the explosion, the giant pillar of fire, and tears filled her eyes, which made it look very strange. The enchantress couldn't believe her eyes and couldn't stop crying with excitement. Masil realized that she was mistaken, and what she saw was not magic but physics, but he could not say so. Larsa hurriedly praised her brother. She was just beaming with happiness. But then his sister strangely started praising his disobedience, calling it his brother's greatest achievement. Masil listened to this in surprise, and while his brother and sister were chatting, a squad of female guards stood in the distance and no one could take their eyes off them. Katrina was surprised that the boy had mastered legendary magic at such a young age. Arrow was amazed that Masil didn't feel any fatigue after such a thing, and Ash excitedly echoed them that this magic was notorious for being difficult to control. And only Freya continued to cry quietly. They watched the joyful interaction between the children, recognizing that the boy was truly the reincarnation of a sage. And the father of the family had a book and a pen in his hands. He was in a delighted hurry to write down a new exciting episode from the life of the great sage Masil. The boy himself did not like such an idea, but the man was no longer to be stopped. It was raining. The carriages continued their leisurely movement through the forest. In one of the carriages were Masil, his sister, his father, and a sorceress from the women's squad called Freya. The girl, looking out the window, assumed that if this continued, they would arrive in Namrai without incident. Masil, however, sat very pensive. A bad feeling of foreboding did not let him go. The carriage jerked on a bump, causing his sister to fall on top of her brother. He held his sister up, inquiring as to her condition. The girl thanked her brother cheerfully and said she was fine. Freya stared at the girl, not understanding why the girl was so happy. But their idyll ended with the abrupt stop of the carriage. The man hurriedly got out to find out the reason for the stop from Carton. The girl calmly informed him that everything was alright, but bandits came in their way. There were many of them, but one in particular stood out from the crowd. He was twice as big, pumped up build and with a scar on his bald head. And his smile didn't bode well. And this big thug with a smile offered them that if they gave up all their luggage and money, he would let them escape. Katrina only grinned, surprising the bald man by calling it an amusing joke. The all-female squad came out and prepared for battle, and Katrina already advised the bandits to get out of their way, and since she liked their humor, she would let them go in peace. But the bandits only grew more bold when they saw that the entire guard force was made up of girls. Very pretty girls. One of the bandits decided to ask the bald man, calling him boss, what they would do with the little girl. He pointed his finger at Lars, and the bandit boss confirmed that his instincts were correct. The girl clung tensely to her brother. The bald man muttered that these children had to be captured, as their master wished. Katrina realized that a fight could not be avoided, but then Matt and I stepped forward. The man adopted a fighting stance, urging the girls to show these bandits their refusal in a way that even the last monkey would understand. The man with the scar on his head grinned viciously at such words. All the bandits rushed to the attack while their boss gloatingly announced that the man had condemned himself with this answer. In return, he ordered the girls and children to be taken alive. The bald man also authorized his team to kill the man standing in the way. Katrina was concerned that their lord had decided to join the fight, which she hastened to report. One of the bandits managed to sneak in unnoticed from behind and prepared to stab Matt and I in the back. The man didn't even turn around and stabbed his sword over his shoulder, breaking his attacker's stick. And after throwing the attacker's stick over his shoulder, the man said it was funny. The protagonist's father was serious. To him it was like fighting a scarecrow. Such a response put the female squad leader at peace. Katrina called out to Fry, and the latter was already standing near the girl, ready. Larsa and the sorceress from the guard simultaneously read out fire spells, and simultaneously unleashed a fireball and fire spear magic into the crowd of bandits. A fire wave showered the people. Explosions were heard. The boss immediately ordered not to panic and called the archers to deal with the sorceresses. Only the archers had time to draw the bowstring, but immediately caught the attack with arrows themselves. The bald head of the gang only turned around to find out what was going on. But Matt and I said no one would answer him. Matt and I, along with the girls, stood over the defeated enemies. The man explained it as a self-evident miracle from our sage Masil. The bald man fell to his knees guiltily, rambling words of apology, mentioned that they had been foolish and would not do such a thing again, pleaded pleadingly for their lives. But the bandit's words didn't impress Matt and I, waiting to see what else he would say. To which the bald man slyly grinned. Laughing, the bandit leader quickly swung his hand, sprinkling a handful of some seeds around the area. As soon as the seeds hit the ground, vines instantly sprouted from them. The vines rapidly began to wrap around Katrina. Even Masil was surprised at this turn of events. The commander of the women's squad was already tightly bound by the vines. They were wrapped around her from head to toe. The others had not been left alone by the plant either. All were suspended and tied up in the air. None of them could move because of the vines. The bald man cheered loudly. He was satisfied that he was able to take them by surprise, and the delighted bandits praised their boss. However, the bandits were perplexed as to why the plant had tied them up like that and suspended them in the air. Their leader admitted that his magic could not see the difference between enemies and allies. Unclenching his fists, the bandit leader made his way towards the children left behind. Masil decided to ask the man with the scar on his head why they weren't also tied up like everyone else. To which with a smug smirk the bald man said it wasn't necessary against two defenseless children. Pushing his sister behind his back, the protagonist stepped forward, informing the man that he had miscalculated a bit. Masil was angry that the man had hurt everyone, so there would be no forgiveness for him. The bald man hedged his bets by taking the boy's father hostage and threatening him with a knife. He didn't know if the boy was really the great sage of the past, so he advised him not to make any unnecessary movements. Then Masil, frozen in place, decided to ask the bandit for a favor. The head of the bandits and the boy's father were surprised by the question, for Masil asked if he could breathe. The bald man treated the request with indifference, giving his assent. Madanai continued to stare at his son perplexed. Madanai, who was still in danger from the bandit's dagger, threw a short chuckle. The boy's father already admitted more calmly that it would be fun to watch. But the bandit boss didn't like the fact that a man in that position could still talk. Masil clarified once more, distracting the bald man, that he wanted to breathe. The bandit, waving him away, told him to do what he wanted. Finally, the boy took his first deep breath. In the meantime, the bandits appealed to their leader to release them. The bald man didn't mind, but strictly ordered them to keep an eye on the boy. Masil continued to breathe deeply, and his sister, who was standing nearby, felt cold, from which she wrapped her arms around herself to keep warm. The bandits gradually freed themselves from their restraints and began to notice the coldness. It seemed strange to some of them. Meanwhile, the boy focused his mind on the bandits. He had a little more to go. The bald man guessed that the cold started the moment the boy began to breathe. The bandit leader only had time to look back in the boy's direction as the frosty air began to gather heavily around him. In the next instant, he was completely transformed into a huge ice stalagmite, and Masil did not stop breathing deeply. The bandits were horrified to see what had become of their chief. They panicked. The boy took one last deep breath. The family pounced on the protagonist with delight. The girl praised, and the father is glad that he waited for another miracle from Sage Masil. Such attention from his loved ones made the boy a little embarrassed. Fry's quiet voice was heard, causing Masil to immediately turn his attention to her. The sorceress was shouting in a maddened voice and with undisguised admiration that she had been able to see the very legendary magic that increased characteristics. This magic was said to have been spread by the great sage himself. She was ecstatic after seeing this superb ice-enhanced frost magic. The girls from the guarding squad were all gathered and were already all together, continuing to be amazed by Masil's magic, and some were still feeling the frost that had not been dispelled completely. However, the boy was distracted when he saw his sister with ruddy cheeks watching him intently. Masil, concerned that his sister might be cold, stroked her head. Steam immediately rose from his sister's head, but the girl with steam on her head calmed her brother by informing him that she was now very hot. The boy was satisfied with the answer. The bandit boss was released from his icy confinement, and the first thing he said was regret. After all, if things had worked out, they could have gotten a lot of money. Katrina with a satisfied smirk threw the rope at the bound bald man. Now he would have plenty of those ropes. Madanai shook off his palms. After all, the father of the family had moved all the bandits into the carriage, and was going to turn them in at the nearest town. After that, he would continue on to Namrai again. Some time later, already on the road, the heroes realized that today they would be able to arrive in Namrai. The rain continued to pour from the sky. Meanwhile, in the castle of the Margrave of Namrai, a voice was heard in one of the towers looking for the lady. The maid turned to the girl who was standing near the window, asking her to come down and meet the guests. Not experiencing any joyful emotions, the girl agreed. Some time later, in the castle located in the Margraviate of Namrai, in the library, the girl greeted the guests. She is a senior maid and her name is Mesa. She was assigned to take care of Masil and Larsa. Since the protagonist decided to stay put and read books, he offered the maid to watch over and help his sister. Mesa agreed unconditionally. The girl with a pleading look in her eyes asked her brother, then, to return to the rest room as soon as possible. He had nothing left but to agree to such a strange request. There were already cups and cookies on the table. Left alone with himself, Masil also put down his books and started reading. His loneliness was broken by the appearance of a strange girl, who looked with interest into the contents of the book he was reading. She asked if the boy understood what was written in the book, and he answered in the affirmative. Masil thought she might be one of the people invited to the ball. He explained to the girl that if he didn't know the terms, he probably wouldn't understand anything then. The girl with the book in her hand silently sat down at a nearby chair. This surprised the protagonist, but he tried not to show it. The girl in turn decided to get acquainted, calling herself Ari. Masil also called herself Lorraine and asked what kind of book she was going to read. Ari confessed that it was the complete story of the great sage Masil. The protagonist choked with surprise. The girl patted him on the back worriedly. The boy cautiously suggested that the girl was interested in him, but seriously said that it wasn't just interest in him. The girl, mesmerized with a blush on her cheeks, confessed that the great sage Masil is life to her. There are many legends about him. He is the main engine of the magical world and society as a whole. Masil was surprised by such confessions. Ari pressingly began to demand an answer from the boy regarding his opinion of the great sage. Masil confusedly replied that the sage was physically strong and the boy wants to follow his example, and not neglect both physical and mental activities. The girl was seriously interested in the boy's answer, for she did not know that the sage was physically strong. And, coming close to his face, she demanded to name the books in which he had read it. But then there was a familiar voice in the room, asking her to stop. The voice was Lars, and she was asking very loudly to let her go. A slightly chubby boy with hair as black as tar was clutching at her arm. He grudgingly complained to her not to go against him. Masil rushed to his sister's voice. The protagonist only needed to look into his sister's desperate eyes to become enraged. In the blink of an eye, Masil moved to his sister, taking her in his arms. In the next instant, he moved a decent distance away from the black-haired boy. As soon as the sister was in his arms, Masil asked warmly if she was all right. The girl embarrassedly replied that she was fine. A concerned Ari approached them. The sister asked her brother who it was. Masil said that he had met her recently and gave her name. Ari looked interestedly at the already happily smiling girl. She realized it was his little sister, and the one she thought was cute. They were sharply called out. The boy with black hair was angry and demanded not to be ignored. After all, he is Lacan Wagner. Lacan smugly proclaimed himself to be the future master, and, with a gloating chuckle, boasted that at his age, he already has 100 magic power. He is also sure that he is stronger in magic than everyone here. He kept ranting for them not to make too much noise about it and not to draw much attention to his beautiful persona. Everyone was tired of listening to the self-exalting boy. They turned around to leave, but Lacan, who had not expected this, started asking them to wait in a panic. The girls turned around at his request to stop. Lacan admitted that they were very cute and were excellent candidates for his harem. Ari calmly replied to him that it was horrible. Masil and Larsa tried to hold back their laughter, laughing like that was too rude of them. The girl realized that, but there was no way she could stop. Masil continued to chuckle quietly as well. The boy with the black hair was angry at Masil, who obviously didn't understand anything yet. The older maid joined them, apologizing for the delay. Mesa was happy to see the young mistress here as well. Mesa then assumed that the boy with black hair was a son from the Wagner family. Satisfied with this, the boy remarked that the maid was well educated. The maid said that it was natural for a maid from the Namrai family, and then Lacan remembered that the maid had recently addressed one of the girls, calling her young mistress. The girl, standing next to the maid, formally introduced herself to everyone. Her name is Ari Namrai. Everyone was surprised, but it was Lacan who was the most surprised. Ari demanded that the black-haired boy apologize to her friends. Lacan took great umbrage, but still bowed before Masil, apologizing sincerely. However, the protagonist was also taken aback, but accepted the apology. On unsteady legs, Lacan ran out of the library. The maid hurriedly apologized for the inconvenience to the guests, addressing them by their first names. The young mistress of the Namrai family heard the name Masil, which surprised her. Ari decided to check with his sister to see if he was the same Masil with zero potential in magic. The girl excitedly confirmed it, saying that he was also a great sage. Ari mesmerized with a blush on her cheeks and confessed that the great sage Masil was as important to her as her entire life. That he has discovered many legends and taught others magic. He is in charge not only in the magical world. But here the boy hurriedly stopped the flow of Ari's remarks. With undisguised admiration, the girl came close to Masil, admitting that she was excited to meet the reincarnation of the great sage. The young mistress of the Namrai family seated the guests at the table, asking them to recount their adventures. The boy began to make excuses that there was nothing surprising. He was a simple man with zero potential. The girls were not happy with Masil's answer. The sister became indignant, saying that she knew of her brother's many exploits. The boy realized that when he saved Lars, he used space and time. This in a way was evidence in their favor. All of the girls' attention was turned to the protagonist. The boy was confused by this. Some time later came the ball. In a huge hall danced ladies with cavaliers. Pleasant music was playing. Someone stood aside, watching the dancing couples. A festively dressed Masil was also at the ball. He was surprised to see his sister arrive. Larsa wore a very pretty and lovely dress. She was eager to know Masil's opinion about her clothes. The protagonist sincerely admired, saying that the dress suited her very well. The girl glowed with happiness. She was very happy and threw her arms around her surprised brother. A voice distracted the children, informing them that they looked marvelous. The voice belonged to the father of the family. The man was pleased to see his children. Masil was not left out, saying that the father looked even better than them. A new voice called out to their father, pointing at someone. Masil turned around. The person was making unflattering remarks about Lorraine's family's disrespectful behavior lately. Matt and I turned around, recognizing the person who had said it. It turned out to be Sir Wagner himself, and next to him was his son Lacan. Madanai remarked wryly that he might already be mistaken and Wagner had become an earl, but he was forced to admit that he was right. Masil watched from the sidelines as the two adults stood haughtily close to each other. He realized that their families were not on the best of terms. A bad feeling overtook the protagonist. A tall black-haired man rebuked Lord Lorraine for using his son to get involved with Lord Namrai's daughter. This surprised the protagonist's father. Lakan grinned contentedly when he saw the boy's surprised face. Madanai looked at his son carefully, but the protagonist's father understood. Lord Lorraine stated that he may not know what the issue is here, but he understands that there is no fault on the boy's part. Wagner was not happy with that answer. Eri joined them, immediately turning to Masil. The protagonist was greeted by a man with a pince nez on his nose. He was happy to meet Eri's new friend. This man's name is Rise Namrai. The heads of the Wagner and Lorraine families in a slight bow greeted Lord Namrai. The man kindly asked them not to use a formal greeting. Masil realized that this man is Eri's father. Masil thought that this man was outstanding since he could gather so many people for a ball. Lord Namrai asked the head of the Lorraine family if this child was his. The man looked at Masil, saying yes. Madanai said he was still young, but he was fit to become a great sage. Masil was taken by surprise by her father's words. Eri began to praise Masil in front of her father. She was impressed that the boy could even get through a difficult book. And the boy was already completely confused, mentally asking her to stop. The head of the Wagner family grinned. The man with black hair was not pleased. He believed that even with the ability to read complex books, it wouldn't benefit a person with zero potential. He wasn't impressed with zero, so he decided to suggest something. Sir Wagner proposed to have a magical battle between his son and Lorraine's son. Masil looked at Lakan seriously, and the black-haired boy grinned slyly, looking sneakily at the protagonist. Lord Lorraine was taken aback by the suggestion of the head of the Wagner family. Seeing the man's consternation, Wagner decided to waggishly inquire about his son's inability to handle it. After all, he is supposedly a great sage according to Lorraine. The head of Lorraine's family impulsively began to explain that there was a ball here, and this was not the place to have a magical battle. Lorraine's words made the man with the pince nez on his nose wonder if the guests might accidentally get hurt. Wagner asked Lord Namrai what really bothered him about that. The man with black hair grinned and said that the worry was for Lorraine's son. Little did he know what that crazy kid could pull. Wagner's words hurt the protagonist's father. Masil was angry that the Wagner family was allowing themselves to be insulted by them. He didn't want to use magic in public, but he didn't want those to get away with it either. He would not allow them that. Masil snapped to attention. Lorraine's serious-minded son announced loudly that he was accepting the challenge. The boy's response brought a cocky smirk to Lakan's face. Sir Wagner has offered to stage a magical duel between his son and Lorraine's son. This is a battle clearly for prestige between the Lorraine and Wagner families. Masil strongly agreed to the duel, thus getting everyone's attention. Lord Namrai asked Sir Wagner to be more careful, to which he agreed. Masil got serious, he can't lose. A new voice said interestedly that there was clearly something interesting going on. The owner of this voice turned out to be the princess of the kingdom of Amas. Her name is Milana Amas. She was interested in the fact that it is planned to hold a magical duel between the families Wagner and Lorraine. The appearance of the princess surprised three men. The man who is General Garland rushed to assure Her Highness that he had the perfect subject for the duel. General Garland proudly spread his arms out to the sides, displaying the magic golems behind his back. These golems are used in military training. He created these weapons himself after spending 100,000 gold coins. Masil was surprised to see the magic golems. Everyone present at the ball became interested in the arrival of the golems and began to whisper. Various remarks were heard in the crowd. One informed another that there would be a magical duel. Someone suggested that the son of the Wagner family was quite skillful. Some thought that he was no match for him. The son of the Wagner family, taking off his tailcoat and pulling out his wand, decided to start first. He pointed the wand directly at Masil. The boy with black hair began to recite the spell. His father hurriedly asked Lord Namrai to open the doors to the courtyard. The doors swung open and many small stones rose into the air. It was earth magic. After shouting the name of the power of stone spell, all the raised stones from the courtyard rushed into the hall. They flew swiftly without hitting those present. Larsa noticed that one of the stones was heading straight for her brother's head. She, frightened, called out to him. But at the same moment the girl was surprised. The stone, approaching the boy's head, went around him in an arc, and not a single muscle trembled on Masil's face. The boy explained to his sister that Lakan hadn't meant to hit him. With a disgruntled cluck, the black-haired boy turned away. Surrounded by flying rocks, he alerted everyone that he was ready to begin. General Garland loudly announced for the golems to attack Lacan Wagner. The magic golems followed the order and were already rapidly surrounding the son of the Wagner family. The black-haired boy snorted smugly. He stopped the golem's blow by covering himself with a small wall of stones. Then the stones scattered to the sides, and the golem recoiled from the recoil. Some of those present marveled at the fact that he had blocked the blow with just the stones. The girls were surprised. Larsa didn't expect to see a crude form of magic, and Ari didn't think his control of magic could be like that. Lacan had built a cocoon of stones around himself, and the golems were beating against this wall to no avail. The guests panicked as they saw the son of the Wagner family surrounded by golems. Sir Wagner watched his sons fight closely. He explained that the humans didn't understand anything, for the true magic of Lacany is that. The man interrupted his speech. At that moment, Lacan softly said attack. All the stones swiftly flew in all directions, crashing down with all their might on the golems. Sir Wagner finished his explanation by saying that the essence of Lacan's magic was defense and offense. The golem's arm broke off and fell to the floor not far from Masil. The boy tensely watched it. General Garland was shocked that one of his golems was destroyed so easily. After all, the golem was created from orichalcum, a mineral that was resistant to physical and magical attacks. But still, Garland sincerely praised the black-haired boy for such amazing magic. Then the man shifted his gaze. The man looked at Masil, inquiring about his readiness for battle. The protagonist firmly affirmed his readiness. The girls were burning with anticipation to see Masil's magic, and were sure that the hall would be shocked. The boy confusedly tried to tell them they were overdoing it. General Garland grinned and offered to show the boy what the reincarnation of the great sage could do. Masil approached the golems. The start of the battle was announced. The golems activated at the creator's command. The magical golems immediately swarmed towards the protagonist, who was frozen in place. General Garland's creatures collided with each other. Those present in the hall were surprised by the boy's disappearance, but the more attentive ones noticed that he was upstairs. Masil was indeed above the fussing golems. He had just made a high jump. As soon as the protagonist landed on the floor, he immediately disappeared. This shocked the princess. In the next second, the boy struck the golem. Thoughts of what had happened clouded his mind. If the unfair treatment was only to him, he would not have noticed it. However, his family members had been hurt, so he needed to do what he could. In every second, the boy was swiftly knocking down one golem after another. He was so swift that he couldn't be seen. And when he finally slowed down a bit, he turned around. Masil brought up his fist for another blow, thinking that there would be nothing special in this one. Would be no big deal, and delivered a crushing blow. The blow was so strong that the objects began to crumple and break apart. With a rumble, all the golems fell to the floor in a great pile of iron. There was silence. The boy looked dumbfounded at the work of his hands. What he saw caused the Wagner family to crouch down in amazement. Lord Namrai was surprised, and Garland lost control of his mind from sheer shock. Masil himself was surprised as well. And then the hall went wild at the commentary. Everyone was shocked at what he had destroyed with one simple blow. It was hard to believe. The protagonist panicked as he realized he had overdone it a bit. The happy father and sister rushed to hug Masil. There was an endless stream of praise from the family. They had no doubt that he was a great sage, that he was the best and strongest. There was nothing left for the boy to do but thank them. Masil remembered General Garland, mentally wondering if he was all right. But he saw the man slumped on the floor. Garland was muttering quietly about the money spent on the golems. The deep shock wouldn't let him go. Masil was worried about what had happened and decided to check with his father to see if they needed to be compensated. The boy was answered by the princess instead of his father that there was no need. She noticed that the Wagner family was also silent. It was great magic, the princess admitted, for which the boy thanked her embarrassedly. The girl cast a thoughtful glance at the dish on the table, then held out her palm to the boy, which puzzled Masil. The father quietly prompted his son to ask her to dance. Masil hurriedly followed his father's instruction. Her Highness gladly agreed. They twirled in a dance. The princess inquired of the protagonist that rice was a specialty in Lorraine territory. The boy confirmed this, adding that rice food is delicious. The boy confessed that he was honored and thought his father would be happy too. The princess was happy to hear this. Gently twirling the boy, the princess announced that the dance was over. She didn't want to keep the other ladies waiting long. Masil saw who the princess was talking about. Ari and Larsa were waiting impatiently for them, keeping their eyes open. The girl quietly in the boy's ear thanked him for his good memory. Larsa indignantly called out to her older brother, but before she could say anything, Ari grabbed Masil's arm tightly. The embarrassed girl demanded to dance with her, much to Larsa's surprise. Masil reprimanded her sister that the next dance would definitely be with her. but Larsa resented it, for she had been waiting all this time already. The princess approached the head of the Lorraine family. The girl informed her that today's dish was rice, it wasn't supposed to be porridge. She had overheard it by accident. Madanai was surprised. She assured that she would investigate the rascals behind it. The man thanked her. The princess began to praise Lord Lorraine for the great sage's splendid upbringing, and a rice dish she had never tasted before. And on top of all that, she took an interest in Lorraine's territory. The man didn't understand what the girl was getting at. She explained that she was going to disturb Earl Lorraine's territory a bit. The man shouted the question loudly as to what, from which drew the attention of a puzzled Masil. The carriages were traveling down a forest road. Inside one of the carriages, Masil confusedly asked the girl if it was okay that she was traveling in the same carriage as them. Larsa and Freya were a little tense, for opposite sat her highness. The thoughtful princess replied that they were just traveling together to Lorraine's territory. The girl thoughtfully informed that it was a matter of speech. She wanted Masil to be more casual. The boy didn't understand her. The princess requested that they change the manner in which they addressed her. After all, Your Highness almost sounded too formal, and she didn't want that. The princess was offered the option of addressing her as Your Highness Milan. Masil didn't think it was a good idea. The girl tasted the address Milan thoughtfully, as if to taste it. It surprised everyone very much. She wished aloud to be addressed by the name Milan. The embarrassed Masil tried to suggest that she be addressed as Princess Milan. The princess smiled kindly, thinking that would sound too formal as well. The other passengers didn't know what to say. Larsa remarked that it was unexpected, as it was difficult to find an approach to the princess. Such a statement discouraged the protagonist trying to deny it. The princess admitted that it didn't bother her. However, she hadn't expected something like this from the great sage. Had they been closer, one might have called him a predator. Larsa excitedly began to ask Masil that did he really like women a year older than him. The boy did not understand what his sister meant, and the princess turned her attention to the noise outside the carriage. The princess asked a girl in armor what was wrong. This girl was riding a horse, and her name is Tart. She worriedly informed her highness about the bandits, asking her not to leave the carriage. Milan looked around puzzled, asking where the bandits were. Tart pointed upward. The princess looked up in surprise. There were many creatures floating in the sky, with humans perched on them. One of the bad men reported that they were bandits of Wyverns, and demanded that they give them Princess Amos and all the money. Apparently it was their leader who spoke. Tart prepared her bow for battle. The female squad of guards as well as the protagonist's father came out and picked up their weapons as well. The girl in armor advised those who came out to leave before they were injured. Noticing that the people below were preparing for defense, the young man on the Wyvern grinned. It was curious to see who else was going to get hurt here. After shouting that, he directed his Wyvern to attack. Everyone else followed suit. Tart shouted an order to the air defense squad to begin their defense, and ordered them to fire at the approaching targets. The chief of the bandits was sure they would fail. He prepared to throw the spear. The guy threw the spear, calling for the others to teach them a lesson. A multitude of spears rained down on the people below. They were diligently shortening themselves. The chief bandit's wyvern swung its sharp end of its tail to attack with it. The blow was intended for the girl on the horse, but a man managed to jump up and cut off the tail, preventing the attack. It was Lord Lorraine, and he asked not to underestimate these ordinary-looking wyverns. The armored girl admitted that she had indeed underestimated, but such was the situation. Masil climbed out of the carriage interestedly after seeing the wyverns soaring in the sky. The protagonist asked the girl in armor if she was doing well, but instead of answering, Tarth and Madanai were surprised by his arrival. He explained his arrival by saying that everyone called as if they were tired of guarding the carriage, so he came to help. They wanted to persuade him not to bother, but when they saw how he calmly caught the spear on the fly, they immediately thanked him for his care. Masil calmly moved forward, informing everyone that he was bestirring his enemies. A bewildered Tarth expressed her gratitude, but didn't quite know what he meant. The boy, meanwhile, stretched his fingers and asked everyone to step back a bit. Tart immediately gave everyone the order to get down. However, as she wiped away her sweat, she still didn't understand what this boy was going to do. The bandits noticed that it was getting kind of hot. The boy's hand was covered in steam, and he himself took a deep breath. Masil took a concentrated swing. Then his fist felt like air. Everyone was swayed. The bandit leader was shocked, for a wind had risen and swirled. The violent wind formed a small tornado that knocked down all the wyverns and their riders. Tart couldn't believe her eyes, thinking it was a dream, and the female squad clung to the protagonist's father to keep from flying away. Freya, astonished, reported that this is the famous elemental disaster magic, and it's called a tornado crisis. The father did not expect anything else from the great sage. A while later, the bandits were sitting on the ground and tied up. The chief bandit resented the one who said of the boy that he was just a child. In his opinion, a child could not cause such a tornado, but his associates picked up on it and reminded him that he was the one who said it. But their head began to deny it. Larsa was surprised that the bandits were talking common sense. However, she calmly informed them that her brother was capable of causing several natural disasters if he wanted to. This news caused a storm of emotion among the connected. The head of the Lorraine family asked the princess if they could make a small detour. The girl didn't understand what the man was getting at. He explained that they were in Cutter's territory, so they needed to report back and turn in the bandits. The princess was fine with that. A while later, already in Cutter's castle, the elderly man didn't expect it. There will be bandits riding wyverns. This man is the feudal Baron Hage Cutter. Hage apologized to the princess for putting her crew in danger. He would henceforth make every effort to keep the territory safe. The girl reassured the Baron, informing him that she was able to see the great sage's magic again. All the heroes followed the Baron down the corridor. He reported that the bandits on the wyverns had only appeared a few days ago. In the past, damage from bandits and monsters was rare and unusual. A map of the lands was spread out on the table. Tart suggested that there was some sort of connection to it, so she would scout the mountain road some more. Lord Lorraine asked Hage about requesting help from the guild, to which the Baron suggested using other methods, such as magical tools. Everyone stood pensively by the map. They realized that none of these things were universal. If only they could build a tunnel through Cutter's mountainous territory. But the problem was still distance. Masil looked out from behind his father's back interestedly, looking at the map. He wondered about the tunnel. Night had fallen on Cutter's territory. Masil stood against the mountain wall. The boy thought it was a great spot. He placed his palm on the wall, then pulled back his foot, clenched his fist. The protagonist exhaled deeply and concentrated, standing in a fighting stance. He activated the cells and strengthened his mind, then increased his strength. There was a rumbling sound in the neighborhood. A pillar of dust rose into the air. Masil stood in front of the hole formed in the mountain. He had made the tunnel in one day. The boy was pleased with himself, for now it was possible to continue the journey. The Baron burst into the hall, shrieking that this was terrible. At the table, Masil and the princess were eating, who turned their attention to him. The girl asked in surprise what was wrong with the Baron this early. Hage apologized to the princess, but could not help but report the terrible thing. A while later, all the heroes gathered in one place and stared in amazement. Except for Madanai, he was ecstatic. Everyone stared at the tunnel that had formed, which had appeared overnight. Sorceress Freya of the female guard squad once again found something to say about it. She enthusiastically proclaimed that before them was a legendary engineering magic called the Castle of Midgard. The shocked princess further clarified with Cage that the tunnel had appeared overnight. He, equally shocked, confirmed it, and then someone turned to Masil that it was rightly his doing. After all, the boy panicked, pretending he didn't understand or know anything. He couldn't have created the tunnel overnight. But his family immediately noticed his lies and loudly informed him of it. They knew that Masil could not lie, just like the great sage. The Baron explained that this tunnel led to the natural territory, but there was another one that led towards Lorraine's territory. The princess was amazed by all of this. Lord Lorraine laughed good-naturedly at his son, saying that he couldn't hide it anymore. Masil sighed heavily, and Katrina was already kneading her hands with anticipation, hoping to find something interesting there. The sorceress from the women's squad wasn't so sure. Katrina's words spurred something Masil remembered while he was digging this tunnel. After some more time later, the boy led everyone to the right place. The Baron assumed it was a dungeon. The protagonist explained what was in front of them only looked like a rock, but Masil asked everyone to step back a bit, after which he struck the rock with his fist. The large stone shattered into many small stones. A huge gate appeared in front of everyone. The people present were completely speechless. The boy was pleased that his guess was correct. He turned to the women's group, calling them the older sisters. Masil invited them to show themselves. Masil explained to Katrina that when it comes to dungeons, that is the job of adventurers. After all, there are not only dangerous monsters out there, but also treasures that no one has ever seen. The boy's words had an effect. The women's troop became eager. Masil asked the Baron and his father to report the matter to the guild. The protagonist assumed that the guild would simply not believe him. The girl in armor approached Her Highness, offering to return to the city. But the princess was already gazing mesmerized at the dungeon, her heart beating hard with anticipation. Tart only sighed doomedly. Already inside the dungeon, the female squad, Masil, Larsa, Tart and the princess were cautiously walking down the corridor. Katrina ran her hand along the wall, recognizing that the structure of the dungeon was quite sturdy. Masil picked up on Katrina's thought, explaining that the structure depends on the dungeon. It looked like a cave. The boy had read about it in a book. Ash, who was walking ahead of them, felt something approaching them. Everyone tensed when they saw a ferocious two-headed monstrous dog. Its growling sounded loudly in the dungeon. Masil calmly regarded the appearing Orthros, calling it an easy opponent. The boy's words caused everyone a deep shock, and only Larsa happily noted that she did not expect any other answer from her brother. Even so, the princess felt that they could not stand by and just watch. She prepared herself about to cast some sort of spell. It was a blob of light. The princess magic blinded the monster, and she told everyone to use this attack as a starting point. Orthros, on the other hand, swallowed the light, which surprised the female squad. Katrina hurriedly instructed Fry to use whatever magic she could against the monster, but the sorceress admitted in a panic that she couldn't remember any defense spells against the flames of magical beasts. Masil loudly ordered the monster to get away. Orthros was unable to release the flames at Katrina. Only a little smoke came out instead of fire. Enchantress Freya watched with admiration again, describing the magic as legendary for counterattacking. This magic deflects attacks and blocks the opponent's movement, an unrivaled counterattack. However, the girls realized that this was a great chance to defeat the monster, so they prepared to attack. While the monster was being shot with spells, Tart and Katrina got close to the Orthros from behind. They simultaneously lowered their swords, stripping the monster of its heads. Katrina couldn't believe her eyes that they were able to do this. The girl was amazed that they had defeated the monster. Masil happily confirmed that they had. The rest of the female squad had collapsed from exhaustion. Katrina voiced her thought that they were still on the first floor and had already met the magical beast. Ash sluggishly uttered that she was already tired. Tart told the boy that they might need a healer. Masil thought for a moment, but decided he would heal everyone himself. He waved his hand. The female troop noticed that the wounds were gone and the fatigue was gone. Freya marveled, calling it legendary healing magic, Dire Grand. And the boy was confused, thinking he couldn't tell her it was just sweat. And Larsa and the princess also noticed that the scent from the magic was pleasant and that the fatigue was gone. Masil suggested that they continue on their way. He said that he sensed a small number of monsters. This surprised the female squad. They didn't expect the boy to be capable of such a thing as well, just a perfect search. They walked down a spiral staircase. After that they reached a huge beautiful gate. Katrina assumed it was the boss's room. The massive doors opened with a creak. The room immediately began to light up with torches, illuminating the space. Masil stepped into the room. A pile of armor lay against one of the walls. The protagonist looked around the empty room. There was no one there. A rustle was heard in the pile of armor. They stirred and began to assemble into a full armor, but inside it was hollow. It was a silver knight. Without wasting time, the knight struck a powerful blow with his sword, but the girls had time to react and jump aside. Masil happily asked everyone that it was an easy opponent. The girls were horrified and asked how he was easy. The protagonist is the only one who is calm when the rest of the team is confused. Masil stood not far from the dungeon boss, the Silver Knight. The protagonist didn't have time to do anything before he was asked to wait. The female squad wanted to confront the enemy with their own strength. Arrow said they couldn't rely on his strength all the time. Katrina simply asked the great sage to observe, and the sorceress was already analyzing the enemy. Larsa also felt that this was the best chance to prove herself to her older brother. She clutched her magic wand with excitement. The princess began to recite the glowing dress spell. Next, Larsa began to recite the spell, summoning hurricane magic. Katrina gave the command to fight and everyone rushed to the attack. The sorceress from the female squad used fire dog magic. She directed the magic towards the enemy with her staff. The silhouettes of the dogs formed from the fire and immediately rushed in that direction. The fire magic rained down on the Silver Knight, but he managed to protect himself with his shield. Then with a quick sweep of his arm to the side, he dispelled the fire dogs. But the female squad leader headed towards him with an exclamation. Katrina threw a series of blows at the same instant. The knight lost a bit of his balance, and one of his legs kicked up into the air. Ash managed to jump up and set a trap under the enemy. The enemy was caught in a steel trap. The female squad leader praised Ash and rushed to attack again. But the Silver Knight had time to react and repel the attack. The girl was thrown aside. Katrina managed to land with her feet on the floor. Tart was already rushing forward. The girl in armor unleashed a multitude of blows on the enemy. While the knight hesitated from all this, Tart gave the signal for action. Many magical attacks in the form of arrows were directed at the enemy. There was an explosion. The place where the knight was standing was covered in smoke. The female squad rejoiced that they had done well together. Masil noticed that the knight's weapon shone in the smoke that had not yet dissipated. The glow from the knight's side was noticed by the girls as well. But before they could do anything, the floor cracked and the glow was already blinding. There was a sharp rumble, and immediately a mist formed. The female squad was perplexed as it became quiet, and because of the fog, they couldn't see what was happening. But the fog soon began to dissipate, and Tart was discouraged by what she saw. Masil was standing tensely, with a wall in front of him. Katrina sat up, surprised that the wall appeared out of the floor. The boy explained to everyone that the Silver Knight releases all magic after death. But the boy had gotten there in time and stopped it. Katrina and Arrow realized that the great sage had saved them again, and the sorceress berated herself for her carelessness. Not far from them, a chest fell to the floor. Masil happily informed everyone that he entered the battle at the very end. Therefore, the treasure chest was a sign that it was a shared victory. The boy's words cheered up and pleased all the girls. A short time later at Cutter Castle, the leader of the troop called Bearded Men indignantly asked the Baron what would happen to them if he tunneled through. The main one's name is Mustache, the second one is Peard, the next one is Loach, and the last one's name is Chobai. The Baron asked Mustache to calm down and wait for the return of the great sage. But the man only became even more indignant at this. But immediately a voice was heard announcing that he had returned. Mustache approached the boy and said that he did not care whether he was the greatest sage or not. Masil stared at the man puzzled. The Baron's servant cooled the fervor of the leader of the Bearded Men. But the man did not understand what was wrong with his words. The Baron explained that it was rude. The father of the protagonist inquired whether the man had visited the dungeon. Mustache was interested in that too, and the boy eagerly confirmed. He dumped many resources and items on the floor from the dungeon. The protagonist eagerly told who they had met in the dungeon. And he wasn't alone there were others along with him. The Bearded Men listened attentively to the boy. Masil showed the head of the Orthus to the incomprehensible men. But then Mustache became very tense. Mustache grabbed the boy's palms, confessing that from now on the Bearded Men's squad would dedicate their lives to him. Such a confession alarmed Masil, telling him not to do it. However, the man continued to pour out his soul. He thought only of losing his job as a guard because of the tunnel. He even threw a tantrum, knowing nothing about the boy. Mustache tearfully admitted honestly that now he would repay him in kind, and called him Big Brother. Lord Lorraine chuckled that another legend from the great sage Masil had appeared. At his father's words, the boy bewilderedly asked to finally go home. A short while later in Lorraine's territory, the princess looked on in surprise. The princess was happy to arrive at the place where the great sage Masil was born and raised. The city of Masil. The streets of the city were bustling with activity. Some vendor happily handed the boy an apple. Some children were playing catching up with each other. Elderly people sat on a bench watching everyone. A girl on the way raved that everyone was cheerful, and the town was filled with warmth. Exactly like the name of the town itself, Masil. The boy confessed to the princess that the name confused him a bit. The princess cheered the boy up, thinking it was a good name for the town. The boy doomedly tried to agree. Masil was called out by name by a vendor. The man offered him a fruit, telling him that it tasted even better today. Then he noticed the girl and asked who it was next to him. The girl introduced herself, calling herself Milan. The vendor, hearing about Amos, immediately realized that he was looking at Princess Amos. Passers-by heard this, stopping. The girl was surrounded by people, offering to take her local treasures, offered to taste the exquisite dishes, offered to take souvenirs, clothes. The bewildered princess said she could not accept so much. Meanwhile, the boys called out to Masil, drawing his attention. They were Mobman and Nagami. The boys asked the protagonist what kind of crowd had gathered. Instead of answering, Masil called out to the princess. The girl heard the boy's voice and approached. The princess approached the boys, leaning in slightly. She asked if they were friends to Masil, and the excited boys confirmed that they were, and were happy to meet Her Highness. The girl asked the boys not to be so formal, and in fact, since they are Masil's friends, then naturally they are her friends too. Such a statement really surprised the boys. The princess also asked the boys to feel free to address her simply by her name Milan. This sent the boys into a deep shock. The girl cautiously approached by calling the princess by her first name only. A boy standing nearby tried to forbid the girl from expressing herself that way. The princess good-naturedly took the girl's palms, saying that it was correct. Her name is Milan, and it is a pleasure to meet her. Princess Milan was surrounded by the attention of surprised children. Masil and Tart stood at a distance, watching her. The protagonist was impressed that the princess had won the hearts of everyone in town. He was convinced that the princess was indeed full of charm. Tart felt that it would be a great pleasure for Her Highness to hear the great sage say those words directly. The boy excitedly denied, citing that he was just a child and not close to the princess. But the girl in armor reminded him that he was actually a great sage. The boy was confused. At this time, in an unknown place, a black silhouette resembling a male figure turned to the man. The man opposite was wearing a cape and hood, confirmed that everything was ready. On the board was a picture with a girl. The unknown man said that their goal was to head to Kaiser and would be there for a few days. They would be sending their man there. The black silhouette told him not to make any mistakes. The hooded man agreed to do the man's will. What is this mysterious group up to? The princess really wanted to stay in Lorraine's territory, but Tarth calmly informed her that she could not allow that. Masil offered Princess Milan to come again as soon as possible, since they now had a tunnel. The girl gladly accepted the offer. The princess worriedly clarified that it would definitely be alright if they guarded her. Mustache confidently stated that everything would be fine if they relied on a squad called the Bearded Men. The men began bragging to Her Majesty, showing off their beard magic. He continued to assure her that neither thieves nor monsters were beyond them. However, watching all of this, Tarth began to worry. While the men continued to assert that everything would be fine, the princess hoped they weren't overestimating themselves. Masil stood and smiled happily, but then he looked around anxiously, but there was no one behind him. The boy thought he must have imagined it. An indeterminate amount of time later, on Cutter's property, Tart helped Her Highness out of the carriage. The princess had already appreciated the usefulness of the tunnel, surprised at the speed with which they had arrived in Kaiser. Princess Milan was greeted by the Baron of these lands. He noted that it had only been a few days, but it was still a great honor to host Her Highness again. The girl apologized for visiting him again on such short notice. Passers-by began to greet them, and the man remarked that everyone was happy to see her, so let her take her time. The girl thanked the Baron. Deep night had fallen on the territory of Cutter. In the designated room for the princess, the girl suddenly awoke. An unpleasant feeling enveloped Princess Milan. She got out of bed and, raising her head, was surprised. Immediately she managed to bounce away in time. A stabbing blow from an unknown man in a cape fell on the place where the girl was lying. The princess demanded the attacker to tell her who he was, but the unknown man only clucked, displeased that she was awake. The assailant's face was hidden by a hood. Sighing, he admitted to the princess that she was only delaying the inevitable. The girl quickly reacted to distract the unknown man and threw a blanket at him, and she herself rushed to the exit of the room, calling the guards and wondering what they were doing at such a moment. The knight sitting on the floor was leaning against the wall, guarding the princess' chambers. The man was sound asleep. The girl worriedly noticed it. Princess Milan had time to react and dodge the flying knives. The knives stabbed into the wall. The unknown man left the room, asking her not to look at him with such a grim look. He planned to finish her instantly, so she wouldn't feel any pain. The girl tensed at this. She ran down the corridor, calling for Tart's help. But the princess had to stop when another unknown person wearing a hood and a cape hiding his body came out from behind the corner. The girl had nowhere to go. Behind her, the path was blocked by the first attacking unknown. The unknown enemy managed to say that this was the end, but was immediately attacked by someone from behind. That someone turned out to be Tart. She perplexedly asked the princess what was going on here. The princess was very happy to see Tart, but still asked if she was okay. The girl confirmed that she was fine. She also admitted that somehow, miraculously, she had managed to stay conscious. Princess Milan noticed that the girl's knee was hurt. Tart, pulling Her Majesty to her side, said that it was just a minor problem. At that moment, an unknown person attacked them, but Tart managed to block the blow, after which she struck back at the enemy. From the recoil, the unknown man fell down in the distance from them. The girls watched expectantly, but there was no movement. It seemed strange to Tarth, so she lifted the edge of her cloak to see who had attacked them. Princess Milan stared puzzled. Underneath the cape was a very ordinary wooden doll. The second attacker also appeared to be a doll, and that was bad, in Tarth's opinion. She tensed up. The girl asked Her Highness to have her magic ready just in case and to stay close to her at all times. Tart gripped her sword tightly and looked around worriedly. The princess looked up at the ceiling, where there were many dolls in exactly the same hooded capes. There was no end to them with no edge in sight. The whole ceiling was covered in them. Immediately, all the dolls jumped to the floor. The girls were surrounded. The horde of cape dolls began to approach, narrowing the circle. Tart readied her weapons. The first few dolls rushed to attack the girl, but her sword had no problem cutting them all down with a single blow. They tried to attack the princess, but Tart managed to jump up and protect Her Highness. However, it was not without injuries. The wounded girl asked Princess Milan if she was alright. The The princess confirmed that she was, but was concerned about Tart's wounds. The girl replied that it wasn't a problem. Such an answer did not satisfy the princess. Everything inside her clenched with helplessness. She wished she could use at least one attack spell. Suddenly, the dolls began to collapse. A man appeared in front of the girls and informed them that he had an unpleasant feeling all day, but he was glad that they were both safe. It was Masil himself. Tarth prompted the boy. In order to deal with the dolls, they needed to find the sorcerer controlling them. Masil turned to the side. He looked intently at one of the walls, looking as if through it. He swung for a punch, sure it was here. Masil thumped the wall loudly without breaking it, and that was enough. All the puppets went limp and fell over. The protagonist explained that with this blow he broke through the walls and immobilized the sorcerer. That's why the dolls stopped moving. Tart was shocked at how easily the boy had located the sorcerer, when the girl herself could not locate him. The princess marveled at his detection magic, and Masil only laughed uncertainly at that. But then the boy suddenly turned away from the girls, informing them that this was not the end. A huge wooden doll rose up in front of them. Her body consisted of the broken remains of the wooden dolls that lay on the floor. Masil commanded the girls to step back. He didn't know how to handle it, but he promised to stop it. With an exclamation, the boy pointed his fist towards the huge doll. The impact began to collapse. The arm of the huge doll formed from the shattered remains, and then collapsed entirely, crumbling to the floor. The boy stared at it perplexed. Tart picked up part of the doll, saying that no matter how big it was still a wooden doll. Princess Milan called Masil's counterattack magic as magnificent as always. Masil along with the girls went out to the inner courtyard. The protagonist assumed that the sorcerer must be there somewhere. They saw a cluster of men in the distance. It was a troop of bearded men. Mustache rejoiced at Masil's appearance, holding the unconscious young man by the collar. He admitted that he heard the way Masil ran toward the castle. Holding the young man by the scruff of his neck, Mustache inquired if he was the bad guy. Masil confirmed that he was. The boy offered to find out what the man could tell them. After all, according to Masil, this is not just about the attempted assassination of the princess. Who is this mysterious sorcerer? In the territory of Lorraine, the lord of these lands, Madanai, was scrutinizing the wheat. Masil approached him, announcing his return. Before Masil could say anything, his father interrupted him. The joyful man was sure that whatever had happened to the boy, everything had gone well for him. He wouldn't even ask, for he was a great sage. He couldn't have it any other way. Masil realized that everything had gone smoothly, but some time ago, the bound sorcerer was asked who his employer was. To this, the young man had boldly asked who it was, saying. Tart didn't like that, so she asked Mustache to raise the young man's hand. The sorcerer was bound by the magic of the beard, so the man easily complied with the request. Tart prepared her sword, and the boy was perplexed. The girl calmly informed him that she would deprive him of his arm, and the shocked sorcerer hoped that she was joking. Tart was serious, so she would do it, which she informed the young man. With indignation, the boy clucked his tongue. He hastily began to say that he was just doing a guild assignment and doesn't know anything else. When asked who had put everyone in the building to sleep, the sorcerer said that someone else had done it. He was only told to remove the wooden dolls. Masil wondered if there was a secret guild that worried even about such things. The sorcerer was perplexed and asked why they were treating the child like that. This did not please Mustache. He almost started swearing at the young boy, but Masil quickly shut the man's mouth. The boy calmed Mustache down, telling him that the princess was safe and could relax and go to bed. The man had no choice but to listen to Masil. The protagonist approached the bound sorcerer and asked about the dolls. They had gathered into one huge one, and he wondered if it was magic. The sorcerer did not understand the boy. Masil clarified with the sorcerer that he had accepted the order without knowing anything. The young boy excitedly admitted that he knew, but the boy did not finish listening to the boy, telling him that the crime had become even more suspicious, and, leaving, thanked him for sharing his thoughts with him. The sorcerer looked at him incomprehensibly. The protagonist thanked Mustache for saving his life with his beard. The man was glad to hear it, mentioning that everyone had tried, not just him. The princess overheard their conversation. Princess Milan approached the boy, informing him that she had actually saved them. But the boy didn't let her finish, pointing his index finger at his lips, hinting to keep everything a secret. The boy said goodbye to everyone and, after asking Mustache to clean everything up, left. That's how it went. Masil fought back, standing in the fields. The boy mentally reasoned that it was the right decision to say he was stopped by an adventurer rather than a great sage. Considering for the future, it would be safer that way. Masil and his father stood near the field. The man was pensively reading the paper, pronouncing that all was not well. The boy inquired what was wrong. Lord Lorraine held out the paper to his son, explaining that the Wagner family seemed to have started growing rice, and their crop was of the same quality as from Lorraine's fields, but the quantity was 10 times greater. The rice was being considered for export to the Principality of Almas, and recently Her Highness had tasted it and liked it. The man tensely went on to say that export was the problem. It is only allowed in the kingdom one way. Masil wondered if such a large project and involving the kingdom would want to avoid risks. His father admitted that it was bad because the quantity and flavor of rice is different. Masil realized that this was what influenced the decision to export the rice. The father pointed the boy to the paper. The protagonist read on what the father pointed out in the paper. Competition in rice. The father went on to say that the rice competition would take place in Namrai's family after the harvest. And it's strange that the rice in Lorraine's fields hasn't gotten worse in quality, and there are more insect-like monsters every day. They were distracted by a voice from outside telling them it was their turn. The voice belonged to Katrina. Along with her came the rest of the female squad. She reported that she had looked everywhere and had already realized the danger that was looming. Katrina admitted that they needed the help of the Great Sage as there were too many monsters. Masil impulsively informed her father that they needed to defend against the monsters. Katrina repeated that she was asking for the Great Sage's strength. Another new voice also offered its help. It turned out to be Ari along with her faithful maid. She also said that she would help. Katrina said that they would wait for Masil and in the meantime they would go ahead. Ari along with the female squad set off on their journey. Masil was touched by this and mentally thanked everyone. The battle against the insects was going on in the eastern part of the farm. The bearded men on the northeastern part were also fighting against the insects. Larsa was trying to fight on the northern part. On the northwest part of the farm, Ari along with the maid were coping against the insects. Lorraine's southern farm was quiet. But here too, the insects didn't take long to arrive. Monsters appeared from the sky and were already flying into the field. The people working on the farm noticed them and were already panicking that the crops would be destroyed. A man rushed past the people and told them to leave the matter to him. Everyone recognized him as Mr. Masil, and the boy had already waved his arms, picking up the wind. The wind picked up and began to swirl. A tornado formed. The boy diligently increased the flow, so that the wind and the tornado began to cut all the flying insects. People watched the boy's magic, amazed at what the Great Sage could do, and the boy mentally worried if everything was alright. Meanwhile, in the farms of the west, there was a small explosion after the fire strike. The boy with glasses that was watching the squad informed Katrina that the stomach was the monster's weak point. The girl thanked the boy. The insects fought and dodged, but Katrina managed to smash these small targets on the fly. The rest of the female squad joined the fight as well, going to help their commander. Masil sat on a tree branch, watching the battle from above. He was glad that everything was all right here. But then he noticed. The protagonist looked carefully into the distance. A horde of ant-like monsters were running. Masil recognized them as soldier ants, and to him, it seemed a strange order. 2 small beetles were huddled together out of fright. The protagonist was able to see them and realized that the ants were trying to get the golden scarabs. The boy jumped down from the tree. He realized that he had to help with the fields, but he couldn't let them get to the scarabs either. The tree was quickly shredded into stakes by the protagonist. The ant soldiers had already approached the golden scarabs, preparing to attack. The beetles still stood still, not daring to move. Just then, stakes began to fall from the sky right on top of the ants. The boy swiftly landed on one of the stakes stuck in the ground. The scarabs noticed their savior. They climbed on top of him, showing how happy they were. The boy, stroking the bugs, was also happy to see them safe and sound. However, it was too early to relax. The protagonist realized that it was necessary to deal with the soldier ants. After some time in the forest not far from the anthill, not far away lay a twitching ant. Masil was surprised to see that the ant was almost on the verge of death. But they don't have enemies in the forest, do they? Of this he was sure. Listening carefully, the boy realized that someone had attacked the queen ant. Who could it be? The protagonist jumped into the hole. The boy stepped through the ant tunnels and noticed here and there the remains of ants. Some of them were on the verge and some were already dead. He heard something coming from inside the tunnel. He hurried down there as fast as he could. Masil saw something. Some man was handing out instructions and reassuring that they would defeat the queen. Opposite the huge ant queen stood a girl with large wasps. She was having a hard time fending off the attacks. The girl managed to deflect at the very last moment. Masil suggested that perhaps she was not strong enough against the queen. Masil immediately rushed into battle, announcing that he was joining her. The girl only had time to marvel that it was a child. The protagonist concentrated all his energy into a fist and swung it at the queen. With one blow, the queen was defeated. This was watched shockingly by the girl, who fell to the ground. She was so stunned that she didn't notice Masil approaching her. He apologized to the girl, startling her with his appearance. She stared questioningly at the protagonist. The girl was still staring at the boy in amazement, for he had just killed the queen with a single blow. She introduced herself in response, calling herself Hani of the honey wasp tribe. Large wasps flew up to the girl from behind. She, pointing at them, called these creatures her main helpers, and it was a pleasure for the girl to meet him. The name Masil seemed familiar to the girl, and she remembered. Hani bowed and hastened to assume aloud that she was facing a great sage. The boy confusedly confirmed this. Hani clarified that there were indeed insect attacks on Lorraine's fields right now. The boy impatiently replied that they were, but why? The girl informed that there was one group mixed with insects and that they were being used for bad purposes. And she, as a person living together with insects, could not stay away. So Hani came to stop them. Masil understood the girl and thanked her for her rescue. The girl embarrassedly asked to be addressed in first name. They were silenced when they heard an incomprehensible noise. In all parts of Lorraine's farm, everyone heard and noticed the huge insect. Masil, along with Honey, got outside and saw it. The girl was shocked. A huge-sized queen scolopendra had burst out of the ground and soared into the sky. The hooded young man loudly admitted that he was frightened when he heard that the ant queen had been defeated by someone, and that someone had calmly walked out of the burrow. Now he realized that this person was a great sage. The guy said all this while standing on the head of the chaos scolopendra. He ordered it to attack. While Masil looked puzzled at what was happening, the girl panicked. She couldn't believe that such a group could have survived. The hooded young man heard that he would not be allowed to do what he wanted. The protagonist and the girl stood on the ground surrounded by wasps. Masil got into a fighting stance. The boy realized that his aim was huge, and he realized that even with poor aim, he would hit. The protagonist made a sharp sweep of his arm toward the scolopendra. For a moment, nothing happened to the insect, but then a pop was heard, and the scolopendra split into several pieces. The remains of the insect rapidly began to fall to the ground. The boy opened his mouth, in which a small fire appeared. But with each passing second, the fire grew stronger. The falling hooded youth noticed the gathering flames below, and tried in horror to shout to him to stop. A huge pillar of fire struck the sky, incinerating the remains of the scolopendra. Even Larsa noticed this pillar, and Honey was in deep shock at what was happening. The boy exhaled deeply, wiping his mouth from which a little smoke was coming out. Hani approached the protagonist, surprising him. She immediately bowed low, thanking the boy for his help. Wasp tried to repeat the bow with the girl. The protagonist was embarrassed. Masil noticed that among the falling and burning remains of the scolopendra, the young man had survived. And now he was flying thanks to the insect that was holding his back. They had clearly tried to escape to their hiding place. The girl also noticed the fleeing enemy and rallied in pursuit, summoning one of the wasps. The protagonist calmly asked the girl not to hurry, because chasing in the open would provoke them, and if they quietly followed them, they could arrive at their hideout and attack them there. The girl understood Masil, but asked what about them, pointing to the place where the wasp was. The wasp was behind the boy's back and was rubbing against him affectionately. Honey happily explained to the puzzled protagonist that the wasp wished to take him for a ride. Masil's father and sister and Eri arrived on the scene along with the maid. They all spoke of having seen the magic of the great sage, but before they could say anything, they stared in surprise, silent. A bewildered Masil was sitting on top of a wasp. Everyone stirred, thinking it was a monster and needed to attack, but the boy hurriedly explained everything. Masil quickly described the situation to his father about the group mixed with insects. Lord Lorraine stood pensive while his son said he wanted to destroy the monster's hideout and take out their human leader. Larsa and Eri began to persistently ask to take them along. Lord Lorraine calmly said that if Masil was with them, they would be fine, and the maid asked to take care of her mistress. Masil was shocked that they immediately gave their permission. Hani said loudly, then, and started calling each wasp by name: Bilos, Beta, Build, Bibate. Everyone was already sitting on top of them. Hani ordered them all to fly, and the wasps immediately took to the sky. The hooded youth continued to fly at a decent distance. The insect held him behind his back and served as his wings. The young man was angry. He hadn't expected things to be this difficult with the child. The insects were near the village, which was why he had asked the head to gather them into an army. A hooded guy slumped on the ground in some village. A man approached him and asked him what he had returned. The elderly and bald man frowned at him. He asked that the man had failed the mission but had returned anyway. The young man was surprised that he already knew everything. The man said he had been following him through insects. The young man was not happy about this, but asked to hear him out. He was sure that the boy had little strength left. It would be possible to overpower him, but for that he needed more insects. The bald elderly man continued to frown at him. However, he agreed, which made the young man happy. The man informed the young man that he was being followed. That was the end of it. The hooded boy looked surprised. Pointing a finger into the sky, the man said to look up there. The boy raised his head in surprise. There were wasps hovering in the sky above the village. The wasps and those who sat on top of them fought off the attacking enemy insects. The young man smiled at his idea, voicing it to the man. He thought it was a chance to round them all up and attack. But the man calmly interrupted him, replying that they had already come. The young man turned around contentedly, not knowing when he had time to gather them. But what he saw caught the young man silent with shock. The bald man greeted the great sage who had descended on a wasp, but immediately said goodbye to him. Behind the man's back, horrible creatures began to emerge. With incomprehensible sounds, the creatures walked. Their bodies were half human and half insect. Everyone looked at them in shock. Larsa was terrified, not understanding what was wrong with their bodies. Masil turned to Hanny, asking about these people. The sad girl didn't let him finish, saying that it was illegal in itself. The man looked haughtily at Masil, and the boy with anger at him. The boy appealed to Honey that they were returned, but the girl didn't let him finish, uttering that they were pitiful. The creatures, assembled from human and insect parts, loomed over them. Larsa and Eri noticed that the creatures were about to attack and prepared to fight back. But a depressed Masil stopped them. The protagonist was about to do it himself. He eyed the creatures tensely. A worried Larsa rushed to her brother, but Hanny paused the girl. She advised her to leave everything to the great sage. And Masil, clenching his fist, decided to end everything in an instant. In one blow, all creatures ceased to exist. Then the calm Masil turned to the girls and asked them to stay and wait for him. Everyone was concerned but did not resist his request. Hanny only asked him to be more careful. Everyone, continuing to stay put, watched Masil walk away deep into the village. Larsa noticed that her brother was angry, and Eri assumed he saw something in the insects. The cave was set up and had everything they needed to explore. At the table was an elderly bald man who turned around at the sound. Masil looked at him angrily. The man began to calmly say that he had gone too far in his research and it had exhausted itself. The man admitted that after years of research he was finally able to create humanoid insects, after which he drank some kind of liquid. Putting the glass on the table, he continued his story, and the angry Masil continued to listen to him in silence. The man admitted that this was meant to be an escape from the days when she hated the great sage, and, of course, left behind by the great sage's magic. Masil angrily replied that he didn't remember leaving any magic behind. The man only grinned, asking if he had never seen it. The elderly bald man snapped his fingers, calling out bugs by name. An insect-like man instantly appeared next to him. The protagonist asked if this was the man who sent the insects into their fields. The man replied that it must be, but the man explained that he was strikingly different from those humanoid insects. The boy quietly pronounced it correct. The satisfied man went on to say that Masil would die here and the insect race could settle with the magic of the great sage. At the same moment, the insect-like man crashes his back into the wall. The man turned around in incomprehension. He saw the monster he had created sealed into the wall, showing no signs of life. Masil informed the man that his years of research had been in vain. The still angry protagonist needed his fingers. He informed the man that he would be furious with him from now on. The man laughed uncontrollably. He was surprised that he hadn't even noticed the magic used against the insect-like man. The elderly bald man went on to say that if you turn a person like him into an insect, but few people go through this transition process successfully. Masil assumed that the man was going to turn into an insect. The man went on to say that if you think about it, is it direct? And drank another glass with an unknown liquid. He placed the empty glass on the table. The man smiled, saying that the preparation was complete. Masil watched in shock as the man began to transform. It was a horrible sight. He inflated like a balloon. Then something burst out. The boy tried to follow the movement. A blow came, but the protagonist managed to react and jump aside. A magical insect appeared before him. A wave was directed at the boy, but he calmly moved away without getting hit by it. Masil understood what had just happened. It was a shock wave, created when the speed of sound increases. It's also called an explosion, but the boy realized the meaning was the same. He appeared suddenly next to the perplexed insect. The protagonist rapidly concentrated energy into his fists, after which he unleashed a multitude of blows at the magical insect. The boy angrily delivered blow after blow, and the last powerful blow sealed the insect into the wall. Masil froze, gazing intently at the work of his hands. Masil cast one last glance at what was left of the man. He remembered that the man had told the man to do what he wanted. He was going to die anyway. The man hated people like this boy. The protagonist walked leisurely out of the cave. Larsa was happy to see her brother safe and sound. Eri, on the other hand, didn't expect him to be done so quickly. Masil turned to Hanny, asking her to stay a bit so he could report to his father. The girl agreed. They decided to return to Lorraine's territory. A short time later at Lorraine's mansion, Masil was surprised to see him being greeted with tea by the maids. His father and mother were cheerful and sitting on the couch. The maids admitted that the boy's movements were precise and beautiful, that they could not take their eyes off. The eldest maid also confessed that she had heard a lot about the great sage. Eri said he would tell her the details himself. The father got his son's attention. He asked him to tell all the details of what had happened. The boy agreed, taking a seat across from him. Masil looked back at the girls thoughtfully, repeating the word details. All stared back at him perplexed, and only the maid realized. Mesa, the older maid, admonished the girls to change their clothes. Larsa tried to remind her of the details, but the girl interrupted her. She asked them to change their clothes so that the great sage could see their beautiful appearance again. The girls gave in. Masil mentally thanked the maid. After all, it would be difficult for him to talk about such things in front of the children. After some more time, Lord Lorraine was already aware of everything that had happened. He said thoughtfully that it was hard for him to imagine that that area had been targeted by a group mixed with insects. Lord Lorraine said that the Sumanai Mountains are still unexplored. Therefore, if a local ethnic group was hit, it would be a major event. After listening to his father, Masil saw fit to send a letter to the guild. The boy's father turned to Hanny. He was grateful to her for fighting alongside his son. The girl said confusedly that they could not pass by. The man suggested that everyone rest. Still, the great sage had reached out again, so he suggested that the man check himself out. Somewhere in the city, at some establishment, everyone was drinking, socializing, and relaxing. In that place, just in the same company, sat a squad of bearded men and a female squad. They noticed the boy who had come. Everyone began to thank the great sage for his labors. Masil was happy to see everyone. Katrina offered him a drink in their company, but the boy refused, as it was too early for him to drink such a drink. Masil's friends sat near him and talked that it was not good, and in general he might get angry. The protagonist approached Katrina and Mustache, thus attracting their attention. The boy asked them for their help in fighting against the village of the insect mixed group. Since they would soon be recruiting people, they were sure to create a disturbance. That is in the Sumanai Mountains. If of course they don't mind helping, he asked. Mustache and Katrina looked at each other in silence, and then looked at Masil happily. Of course they were happy to help him. The man declared at all that he would participate even if the great sage gave up the idea. But then Katrina wondered where these mountains were.